On July 26, 2015, the quiet of a summer night in Salford was shattered by gunfire. 3 shots rang out, followed by a brief pause, and then 2 more. It was 7:30 p.m. on Clifton Road, and the echoes sent neighbours running as screams rippled through the street. On the ground lay Paul Massey, known across Manchester as Mr. Big. He had been hit 18 times, his body crumpled outside his own front gate. This was no ordinary street shooting, it was a calculated act. The violent end of Salford's most notorious figure.
Plan to take me out, I think I don't know. I'm just laughing at him. I'm laughing, I shake their hands still. Because I know they ain't got the arse right because they know what fucking happened after.
For decades, Massey's name carried both fear and respect. It was whispered in pubs, shouted in headlines, and tied to both order and intimidation in the city's underworld. But that summer evening, bullets rewrote his legacy. In the hours after his passing, news spread across the UK. Television reports called him a law-breaking godfather. Newspapers used the name everyone knew, Mr. Big. Politicians, police, and locals all reacted. The scale of the story was immediate. The Greater Manchester Police knew this case was different. It wasn't a random act. Massey's homicide was linked to long-running gang wars. Assistant Chief Constable Rebecca Sutcliffe addressed the media the next day. She confirmed that the homicide bore all the hallmarks of a targeted outbreak. She warned that the community faced further fierceness if the people responsible were not stopped. Behind the headlines, emotions in Salford were mixed. Some were terrified, others were relieved. For many, Massey represented order in a city scarred by turf wars. His presence often meant disputes were settled quietly. Without him, there was uncertainty. Family members were devastated. His daughter, Lydia, described him as a father who always tried to protect his children. She said he wasn't perfect, but he was loved. To her, the man gunned down outside his home was not just Mr. Big, he was Dad. The funeral in August drew crowds in the hundreds. A horse-drawn carriage carried his coffin through the streets. Friends, relatives, and associates followed behind. Police lined the roads to monitor the event. The turnout showed his influence. Even in passing, Paul Massey was a figure people gathered around. At the same time, detectives worked relentlessly. They looked into his business dealings, his connections, his rivals. The weapon was traced. It was a Scorpion submachine gun, a military-style firearm rarely seen in the UK. The choice of weapon underlined how organized and determined his slayers were. The investigation was complicated. Massey's life was filled with friends and enemies. He had built networks across the Northwest, but he also had rivals ready to challenge him. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, but information was scarce. Fear kept witnesses silent. In the months that followed, Salford saw escalating acts. Petrol bombings and shootings erupted between gangs. Many believed it was a direct result of Massey's demise. Without him, the fragile balance had collapsed. Police called it the Salford Gang War. Families were caught in the middle. Innocent people were injured in the crossfire. The homicide of Massey had unleashed a wave of ferocity that spread across the city. The scale of the gang war forced a wider response. Greater Manchester Police set up a major task force. Officers worked with national agencies, sharing intelligence, tracing firearms, and following money. The homicide of Paul Massey had become the centerpiece of a much bigger picture. But in those first weeks, one thing was clear. Someone had planned his end in detail. They knew where he lived, they knew his routine, they waited for the right moment, and they made sure he would not survive. For the public, the question remained, who ordered the hit? For detectives, the question was even more urgent, how many more losses would follow? The name Paul Massey was written into Salford's history long before July 2015. He grew up in the Ordsall area. Poverty and corruption were constant in the community. Families struggled to survive. Children saw illegal acts from an early age. Massey was one of them. By his teenage years, he was already known to police. Theft, fights, and disorder put him on their radar. Officers called him a nuisance. Locals knew he was fearless. He earned respect through intimidation. Salford was tough, and Massey thrived in that world. He built a reputation. Massey became a name, people whispered. He did not hide from the reputation. He embraced it. His power came from fear. As corruption escalated in Salford, Massey was at the center. Gangs fought for territory. Substances were flowing into the city. Vehemence was a daily event. Massey had influence. He controlled people through loyalty and threats. In 1000, 1992, he was jailed for hitting a man outside a nightclub. The victim survived, but the outbreak showed how far Massey was willing to go. That conviction solidified his reputation. He was not just a street criminal anymore. He was seen as a gang leader. After his release, his network expanded. He became involved in security work. Nightclubs in Manchester and Salford used his services. The security business was a cover. Behind the scenes, intimidation was used to control clubs and rivals. Massey's grip grew stronger. Police kept watch. They saw him as a dangerous figure.
First tonight, the ruthless hitman facing life behind.
It was a label that stuck. Massey did not shy away from it. He enjoyed the power that came with the name. He also built links with criminals across the UK. Illegal gangs in Liverpool and Manchester saw him as an ally. Meetings in pubs and clubs shaped the trade. White powder and H moved through these networks. Salford became part of the bigger picture. Massey was in the middle of it. But Massey was also smart. He presented himself as a businessman. He showed up at community events. He supported local causes. People in Salford saw two sides. A feared gangster, but also a man who helped residents. For some, he was a protector. For others, a criminal who ruined lives. In 1999, he made headlines again. He was arrested in connection with a gangland homicide. The victim, a man with links to rival groups, was found deceased. Massey denied involvement. He was questioned, but later released. No charges were brought. The case deepened his reputation. He was untouchable. By the 2000s, he was a major figure in Salford misconduct. Dirty money flowed. Turf battles continued. Guns were common. Families lived in fear. Massey stood above it. He ran operations but stayed distant from the front line. That made it harder for police to catch him. He also clashed with authorities directly. At one point, he was banned from being a company director after a fraud investigation. Yet he still held influence through associates. He adapted, finding ways around restrictions. His control never slipped. His name was tied to the A-Team gang. The group dominated Salford. Ferocity kept rivals out. The A-Team became infamous in Greater Manchester. Massey was their figurehead. His presence alone kept people in line. Despite arrests, his convictions were limited. Witnesses were too scared to speak. Trials collapsed. Evidence was thin. This only increased the fear surrounding him. People believed he could not be touched. He became larger than life in Salford. At the same time, he spoke about politics. In 2012, he ran for mayor of Salford. It shocked the community. A gangster stepping into politics. He gained thousands of votes. He did not win, but his campaign showed his influence. His slogan was about honesty and standing up for Salford people. Many residents supported him. The election campaign gave him publicity. He did interviews. He spoke about policing, poverty, and housing. He said he wanted to reduce corruption. It was controversial, yet some took him seriously. To them, he was different from the politicians who ignored their community. His personal life was also under scrutiny. He had children and a partner. Those close to him described him as loyal and protective. His family saw a side the public did not, but they also lived under the shadow of his lifestyle. Police raids, threats, and constant surveillance were part of their lives. Massey's past never left him. His name was tied to every gangland shooting and feud in Salford. Even if he was not directly involved, people assumed he was connected. His reputation carried weight. Rivals knew challenging him meant war. By the mid-2010s, tensions in Salford were high. Gangs split, alliances broke down, and new leaders wanted power. Younger criminals were ruthless. They wanted to make their mark. Massey was caught in the middle of these shifts. His authority was not absolute anymore. Younger gangs saw him as old guard. Still, he tried to keep control. He warned about feuds getting out of hand. He told reporters fierceness was increasing and could not be stopped without change. He almost predicted what was coming. His present was full of questions, but his future was uncertain. It all started on the streets. Small fights led to bigger confrontations. The first convictions showed his pattern. Muggings were frequent. Witnesses were often too scared to give statements. Many cases collapsed in court. Massey quickly learned that intimidation worked. It became a tool as much as his fists. And if you find stories like this important, consider subscribing. In the 1980s, Massey built networks through security work. Bouncers were his first recruits. They patrolled nightclubs and bars across Salford. Rivals who tried to enter were turned away with force. Protection rackets soon followed. Businesses were told to pay or face trouble. Some owners paid quietly. Others resisted and were met with smashed windows or threats. Shootings were rare in Manchester then, but Massey's circle normalized their use. He was never shy to display strength. Criminal intelligence files linked him to firearms incidents. None resulted in long jail sentences at first. The substances entered the picture next. Salford gangs tapped into the wider Manchester scene. White powder distribution was spreading from city centres to housing estates. Massey's crew took their share of the market. Police surveillance described meetings in pubs, car parks and private houses. Deals were discussed in code. Money was exchanged in bags. By the early 1990s, Massey's control was wider. Younger recruits joined under his orders. They carried out outbreaks when debts were unpaid. Arson was used to punish. Houses were set alight as warnings. Families of debtors lived in fear. It was all about sending messages. Reports of shootings on Salford streets became common. Car chases and outbreaks with machetes marked the disputes. Massey was linked to many but charged in few. Witnesses stayed silent. Fear kept cases weak. Police launched operations against him several times. Covert listening devices were used. Raids followed. Cash and weapons were seized. But Massey avoided long sentences. Short stretches in prison only gave him time to build connections with other criminals. One major escalation came during the Salford gang wars of the 1990s. Factions battled over control of illegal substances and security work. Massey became a key figure. He earned the nickname Mr. Big from detectives who struggled to pin serious charges. His name carried weight in both Salford and Manchester. The viciousness linked to these wars shocked the public. Innocent people were injured in the crossfire. Families lived on streets where shootings were frequent. The local press called the area a war zone. Council leaders demanded stronger police action. Massey thrived in that climate. He positioned himself as a man who could control chaos. Business owners turned to him for protection. Criminal groups saw him as an ally or rival. He was a central node in the web of Salford corruption. In 1999, one of the most vicious episodes occurred. A feud rose into attempted homicides. Homes were shot at with automatic weapons. Cars were firebombed. Massey's name appeared in intelligence briefings again and again. Detectives labeled him as a stabilizing figure, but also as a cause of the conflicts. Even while suspected of serious delinquencies, he made alliances. Irish organized law-breaking contacts supplied weapons. Liverpool gangs linked with Salford groups for illegal routes. Massey was positioned in the middle. He had influence across regions. His own time in custody grew longer in the early 2000s. He served a prison sentence for hitting a man in a pub fight. The victim survived but refused to testify. Massey walked free earlier than expected. His network waited outside to celebrate. The escalation was visible. Guns, substances, and intimidation were all part of his methods. Police knew it, but struggled to convict him. He was described in official documents as untouchable. Community members whispered his name, but never openly. Even his rivals admitted his control. Interviews with other gang figures later revealed grudging respect. Massey was feared, but he was also recognized as a strategist. He balanced ferocity with negotiation. If an agreement could not be reached, force was used. By 2010, the scale of Salford's illegal economy was in the tens of millions. Massey had lived through decades of disputes. He had seen rivals jailed, deported, yet he remained. His power was not in headlines, but in the streets and estates he influenced. Each year brought new gangs, but the structure stayed. Massey was part of the foundation of organized corruption in Salford. He had built it from small fights into a regional system. His early years of brawls and intimidation had grown into sophisticated networks involving international suppliers. This path explains the escalation. It was never sudden. It was steady, built step by step, from nightclub fights, to protection rackets, to shootings, to the substance distribution across cities. Each level of law-breaking opened the door to the next. By the time he stepped into politics and public life, the foundation was already laid. For the police, it explained why his presence meant trouble wherever he went. Then what happened? something tragic. Unexpectedly, Paul Massey passed away on the evening of July 26, 2015. It was around 7:00 p.m. when he returned to his home in Clifton, Salford. The house was on Manchester Road. Massey had been at a family barbecue earlier. He walked toward his front door. A gunman was waiting. The invader used an automatic weapon. Witnesses later described it as a machine gun. Massey was shot multiple times at close range. He collapsed in his front garden. Emergency services were called. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene. Massey was pronounced gone shortly after. He was 55 years old. This shocked Salford. It sent fear through communities already living under strength. People knew this was not a random act. It was a targeted performance. Residents reported hearing bursts of gunfire. Some said it sounded like a war zone. Others described running inside their homes, afraid of more shots. Children were nearby when it all happened. The assassination was linked immediately to the ongoing gang war in Salford. The feud had already brought shootings and petrol bombings across the city. Massey's passing was seen as a turning point. Police launched a major investigation. Greater Manchester Police treated it as an organized hit. Detectives began looking into rival gangs. They studied Massey's connections. The fierceness did not end with his passing. In fact, it escalated. Shootings increased in the months that followed. Families in the area were forced to move out. Homes were struck. Innocent people were caught up in the chaos. The homicide highlighted the scale of organized corruption in the region. Police leaders admitted they were facing paramilitary-style viciousness. The use of automatic weapons was rare in the UK. It showed the level of planning behind the act. The case remained unsolved for some time. Rumors spread about who was responsible. Some linked it to the A-Team. Others suggested rival factions from Manchester or Liverpool. No one spoke openly. Fear kept people quiet. In the years after his passing, tributes continued. Friends and supporters remembered Massey as Mr. Salford. Some praised his role in trying to calm disputes. Others called him a gangster who lived by the sword. His funeral was held in August 2015. It drew hundreds of mourners. The streets were lined with people. Expensive cars and floral tributes followed the procession. Security was heavy. Police monitored the event closely. The investigation into his homicide widened. Detectives connected it to other shootings. They believed it was part of a wider campaign of ferocity. Eventually, attention turned to Mark Fellows. Fellows was a known enforcer. He had been active in Salford gang circles for years. Detectives found evidence linking him to Massey's passing. Surveillance and phone data placed Fellows near the scene. Further analysis showed he had carried out reconnaissance on Massey's home. In 2018, Fellows was charged with the homicide. He stood trial alongside an associate, Stephen Boyle. The trial began in 2018 at Liverpool Crown Court. Prosecutors described Fellows as a ruthless hitman. They said he used a Scorpion submachine gun. The same weapon had been used in other shootings. The jury heard how Massey was gunned down in front of his home. They listened to details of the planning. Fellows had cycled to the scene. He wore camouflage clothing to blend into the area. Evidence showed how he tracked Massey's movements. GPS devices were used. Communication records linked him to the plot. The trial also covered the homicide of John Kinsella in 2018. Kinsella, a mob enforcer from Liverpool, was shot while walking his dog. Fellows was accused of carrying out both homicides. In January 2019, Fellows was found guilty of ending Paul Massey and John Kinsella lives. The judge called Fellows a gun for hire. He was sentenced to a whole life order. That meant he would never be released from prison. Boyle was found guilty of being an accessory in the Kinsella homicide. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 33 years. The conviction brought some closure but also left scars. Communities in Salford remained divided. Fierceness continued, though at lower levels. Families of victims still lived in fear. Paul Massey's family reacted with mixed emotions. They wanted justice but also feared more retaliation. Some believed Massey's passing could have been prevented if police had acted sooner on threats. His homicide was later reviewed as part of a larger crackdown on organized corruption. Greater Manchester Police launched more operations. Armed patrols increased in hotspot areas. Raids targeted gang members and their homes. Massey's story was cited in Parliament. It was discussed in the media as an example of how far organized felony had spread. Years later, the Salford feud still left marks. People remembered the fear of walking through their streets. Children grew up knowing friends and relatives caught in shootings. The trial of Fellows showed the dangers of gang loyalty. It showed the reach of organized misdeed into ordinary streets, and it showed how one homicide could change the face of a city. Today, Massey's name remains tied to Salford. Some still call him Mr. Salford. Others see him as part of the problem that brought so much pain. What is certain is that his passing was not just a personal loss. It was a community wound, a reminder of the cycle of ferocity that still haunts Greater Manchester.